ready? You got me running.
I am Meredith Hirsh, and this is Working Healthcare. I just interviewed Dan Neissany. He and I are cut from the same cloth. He is a fellow podcaster. He is a consultant in the healthcare world, and he's written a book. That is not what I've done yet. Down the road, but not quite yet. He started his career as a physical therapist and migrated into the business side of medicine. He specializes in transforming chaotic insurance-dependent practices into what he calls structured, profitable organizations through leadership, accountability, operational clarity, and system-driven growth. We talk all about that. The low-hanging fruit that leaders can grab onto to create positive change and things that are outside of our control. Definitely grab a seat and take a listen because there is so much to learn, and Dan offers a lot of pearls of wisdom. Dan Neissany, welcome to Working Healthcare.
Glad to be here, Meredith. Thanks for having me.
We met through LinkedIn, and I want to talk about the power of social media and connections in the business world because you are in healthcare. You're actually a physical therapist by trade, and you jumped into the dark side of medicine, maybe?
Management, yeah, the business side.
Exactly. But what's so fascinating to me right now is how LinkedIn and social media is really opening up doors for people like you and me. You have a podcast. I have a podcast. You have a business. You wrote the book. I haven't written a book yet. And we're both so involved in our business worlds, but because now you're in Vegas and I'm in South Florida, but we connect and we become friends through social media. How has that impacted your career?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a good point. I know how we typically look at, I think when we say social media, I don't think most people think of LinkedIn. I think we tend to focus on, the TikToks, Instagrams, Facebooks of the world. And where those platforms, I look at that, but those platforms used to be about maybe having some interactions and connections. Now it's just very, swipe and just skim across, see what's going on. Whereas LinkedIn, what I really like about it is just genuine, like you said, is genuine relationships and connections. And to your point, not just having a ton of podcast guests on my show from LinkedIn, but just meeting people and then being able to turn those meetings into actual friendships. It's really about just showing up and supporting. And for me, really the benefit, I think, like anybody else, is actually just being purposeful on the platform. And, it's definitely, if you're out there saying, I love connecting with people on Instagram, it's like that approach, how you do it there, is not going to translate onto LinkedIn. And it's really about being purposeful and intentional and just actually showing up and supporting people. And what I mean by that is we know a lot of people don't actually post on LinkedIn, but that doesn't mean you can't go on and actually engage with meaningful conversations and meaningful comments to other people's posts. So I think really the benefit is just meeting like-minded people. Like I said, you're in Florida, I'm in Vegas. I mean, we obviously could meet at conferences, but the probability is pretty low. Being able to, yeah, go ahead.
I've had so many people reach out to me on LinkedIn recently. Probably, I'd say maybe 30% of my Working Healthcare podcast guests I've met through LinkedIn. And it isn't a sales pitch. You didn't reach out to me and say, hey, I want to be on your podcast. You're like, hey, I really like what you posted. I'm in the business world as well in relation to healthcare. And this is the way I feel about this topic. And you and I went back and forth, and I checked you out on LinkedIn and saw that you were a physical therapist, was intrigued by the book that you wrote, was intrigued by what you were doing. And then we picked up the phone and I'm like, hey, can we chat? And we had our quote pre-interview. And then I said, you know what? I want you on this podcast because I want to talk to you about, one, how do you go from being a physical therapist and then getting into the business side and really coaching others through all of the challenges that are going on right now on the business side of healthcare. And how are you utilizing all of these amazing resources that are out there going from, because I know you're from New Jersey and you recently moved out to Vegas. So let's start first with physical therapy. Why did you even choose to become a physical therapist to begin with?
Pretty straightforward. I just wanted to help people get out of pain, and I didn't want to do it through medication and surgery. I wanted to try to do it as naturally as possible. So that's pretty much what took me down that route. Initially, it was to work with athletes, and then I just gravitated in towards, really looking at how do I help the general population.
Walk me through, because you were in New Jersey, you moved out to Vegas. I know you have a family, and you also did a transition in your career. Why did you leave taking care of patients one-on-one to helping patients, I think, in the greater sense by focusing on the business side of medicine?
Yeah. So I got to a point where even when I was in a clinical setting, I moved away from treating patients. It was really 90 to 95% of my time was spent actually just managing the business. And that was just predicated by, I was trying to honestly do both, be the clinician, or be a clinician, I should say, seeing the patients, and then also trying to manage the office, train the staff. And we hired a lot of individuals right out of school. So there's a lot of green clinicians that trying to spend a lot of time training them, but then I have my own caseload, and I would consider myself very dedicated to my patients. So it was just trying to balance the two was damn near impossible. I would just say it was impossible. So at some point I just had to make the decision. Treating patients for me at that point was easy, and I like to be challenged, but I also like to just help, the rest of the staff, knowing that if I help all the clinicians and the rest of the team, it's a better effect and a bigger effect, so to speak, on the patients that we were actually having coming in. So that's why I really kind of made the move more to the business side of it. It was just more about actually helping me free up time. And then realistically, once I was able to do that and could actually train the team and delegate some responsibilities, that actually helped the rest of the team grow a lot more than when I was treating. So their growth was, better than ever when I actually stepped away from treating. They got more independent, they got better, and a lot of them actually moved into director roles.
What do you think of providers who feel like they can do both? They can take care of the patient and treat them and handle the business side of healthcare with all of its complexities?
I don't believe you can do both 5 days a week. So I do talk to providers about making the transition, and I get it. Most of them don't want to stop treating patients altogether, like I did. But you definitely, if your goal is to say, I want to treat patients 4 to 5 days a week and then still manage a business, unless you're literally the person, like you're the guy, it's not going to happen. You got to either give yourself a few, at least 2 days minimum is what I recommend, to just business admin days, because then you have to look at, I think where most people run into the problem from a clinician standpoint is they think, all right, if I have 2 days where I don't see patients and maybe that's 16 hours, what can I possibly be doing for 16 hours to fill up my time? And it's really just comes down to, they typically don't understand what actually just goes into running the business. So that's usually the biggest hesitancy, is that they just don't know what to do with their time. So when you're looking at improving the clinic, improving patient care, there's plenty of things to look at. And again, I'm not saying that as a way to say, go sit in your office and stare at a computer, because I do think that's where some people get tripped up. But it's when you have the time, because I know most of us say, I don't have the time to train my staff, or I don't have the time to do X, Y, and Z. And then you give them the time, and then they still kind of don't know how to structure it. So it's really being able to understand, what do I do with the free time that I have? What are the things I would love to work on in the business that I don't get to do now because I'm just really busy treating patients? That's typically where I would tell them to start.
And I also think it requires strong organizational skills. So my husband and I have partnered together, and we started this practice in 2007. And he really does focus exclusively on the clinical side. He is our senior physician. He likes to meddle in sometimes, and I always remind him to stay in his lane. Yeah. And on Fridays is his administrative day right now, and he does meet with the team and he does train the other physicians, but he's also now returning patient phone calls and getting involved on the clinical side. And he really isn't separating out his clinical role and his, quote, administrative role. What do you recommend to people who have difficulty in the organizational aspect?
I mean, there's, realistically some simple stuff, because that's a question I've gotten asked. Like, I'm just all over the place, or I don't know what to get to what. I think right off the cuff, it's just really two things for me. Is number one is actually understanding what are the really important tasks that, and I hate almost using the word task because we love to create lists that don't really do much for us, but it's really being able to focus on what are the few things that, in your husband's scenario, that one day that I have free, what are the things that are going to deliver the most impact, or creating new programs for patients, whatever it may be. So it's understanding what's the important tasks that I don't get to do those other days. And then realistically, where a lot of people actually just struggle is they don't schedule it. It's not on their calendar. So they're trying to wing their whole day or a few days or the whole week. And then I think we all do that. And a lot of us do that. And then we get to the same point, which is, what did I actually get done this week? Or what did I get done today? Or why did it seem like I did a lot, but didn't actually do much? And it's usually just because the tasks that we really want to focus on, we're simply not putting it on our calendar. And if it's not scheduled, it doesn't get done.
And even if we do put it on the calendar, one piece of advice I was given is to actually allot a specific amount of time for it. So if you think this task or this project is going to take 90 minutes, allot those 90 minutes. If you think you can do it in 15 minutes, you allot 15 minutes. And once 16 minutes is hit, you got to stop and then reschedule it. Otherwise, you find yourself spiraling and never getting anything done.
Yeah, you have to time block for sure. And that's the thing too, right? Some people, well, I thought it would take me an hour, but it took me 2. It's, all right, well, now you know for next time. But to your point, you don't want to like throw off the whole day. So it is, yes, putting on the schedule, creating time blocks, having an idea of how long it should take, and being very strict to, sticking to the schedule.
I love the title of the book that you wrote, I'm the Problem. Take your leadership skills from toxic to transformative. But I like the fact that you titled it, I'm the Problem.
Yes.
Why did you even choose that title?
Realistically, well, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. When I was evaluating some challenges that we were having in the office that I was running, and biggest challenge is just turnover. I had a lot of not just employees, but clinicians, which are the people you typically don't really want to see leaving. But they were quitting. It was very easy for me when I was younger and more insecure and more egotistical to want to blame them, which is, I think what a lot of us leaders, not all leaders, but some of us that aren't fully developed want to blame other people, especially, when I'm looking around and saying to myself, hey, look, I'm working 60 plus hours a week. It can't be me because I'm here all day, every day, helping them out. And then getting to a point where, you can only blame for so long. And then you have to start doing some honest self-reflection. And, that's where it's just, I got to a point where I really think there's a disconnect between who we say or who we think we are compared to who we actually really need to be. So for me, it's, I'm a great leader. And then I started evaluating myself and started looking around and saying, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm falling short. Maybe the person that I think I am, I'm really not even close to that. And I got to a point where I was like, I can't keep blaming the staff. At some point, I have to realize that no matter what's going on, it always falls back to leaders. So that's just where I was like, I think just one day it dawned on me. And I specifically said in my head, like, it's me. It's not them. It's definitely me.
And I appreciate that because I've always said perception is reality. I can think that I'm communicating in the most positive and frequent manner, but if somebody doesn't feel or hear what I think I'm saying, hey, perception is reality. So it is my fault, and I have to figure out how to best communicate with that person.
Yeah, I mean, we look at anytime, I've got to a point now where anytime an employee, I say mess up, they make a mistake or, there's a failure, whatever it is, again, I'm going to always take accountability, right? And you go back, all right, how did I teach you? How did I train you, coach, mentor you? How am I talking to you, to your point? How am I communicating? The way we perceive, is not the way everybody else is seeing it. So it's just, especially if things aren't going well, at some point you have to ask it can't be everybody else. I think that's the easy answer and it makes us feel better to think it's not me. But, old great relationships and old great leaders, at some point, they're going to look and say, all right, where am I maybe falling short? And that's what I did. And that's why, like, after really taking some, time to just reflect on just my own growth, what I was seeing from other employees, I think part of it too is knowing that you ideally want to see other people grow and develop and turn into leaders. Doesn't mean, maybe they want the title of a director or manager, but they start elevating their leadership skills. And that in particular, when I started to look around and evaluate, I wasn't seeing that. And that I think was the biggest thing for me, was just, I'm not seeing what I would expect to see based on my own perception of how I was doing. So therefore, like, maybe I'm not doing as well as I think I am.
And your book really focuses and documents early leadership failures, right? And the evolution toward high performance leadership. Describe some of the early leadership failures, except, you've already talked about placing blame on the other person as opposed to taking responsibility. What else can people learn from you regarding failures that you had in early leadership?
Yeah, so I think a big one, and this is just very common, but loving control and not knowing how to actually teach and in a way that delegates responsibilities. And a rookie mistake is just doing too much and thinking you're actually helping the staff. That's what actually would definitely get me frustrated. And my go-to emotion, and I understand this by now and I got it under control, but my go-to emotion is anger. That's what always kind of pissed me off, is I'm doing all this stuff for you guys, and then I would perceive as not receiving much in return, when in reality, obviously, the more I was doing for them, the less I was giving them the chance to actually do it and fail and learn themselves. So it was really hindering their own growth. So that's a big one. As I said, not being able to delegate. I love micromanaging. I don't do it anymore, but I just got this controlling nature. But that's what a lot of us do. It's the more I do, the more I can control. And it's just that, it's a fallacy. So those were the real two biggest ones. And then I think the third one, and you mentioned communication at the beginning. I had somebody say this to me, and I thought it was BS at the time. But she sidles up to me. She says, you really need to learn how to communicate to everybody else. And I just thought that was kind of ridiculous. I was like, well, I'm one person. There's 15 of you. It would be easier if 15 people learn how to communicate to one person. Like, what a dope. So understanding, how do we communicate to the rest of our team? How do we need to communicate to other people, and how do they like to receive their communication? That was such an important one for me. Because again, for me, you said it, Northeast New Jersey, as I'm direct to the point, just aggressive, fast moving. That is definitely not the way everybody likes to communicate. So I could see why there would be some discrepancies there for sure.
But you and I can do well with that. I'm from Miami, and everyone thinks I'm a New Yorker. So, hey. We can be there.
I love it, but I'm like, it's all right. Give me the less details, the better. But yeah, when you're trying to communicate that to everybody else, it's like, all right, we need to get a little bit more, a little less aggression, a little more details would be good.
I know that when I really struggled at the beginning with delegating responsibility, because I too am super type A and a control freak, I had to learn how to set up accountability parameters. So how do I hold somebody accountable? How do I make sure that they follow through? I can't just delegate and say, hey, get it done, and then not follow up with someone if I'm still responsible. So how do you help encourage or implement accountability measures?
Yeah, so first and foremost is you have to obviously start with leadership, right? I love talking to owners who, they'll say, I want my staff to be accountable and sound. And then I'll ask them, what about you? They're like, oh yeah. It's like, how are you showing up as it's because it's very easy to say, I want everybody else to do this, but then I don't maybe do it as often. And that was definitely an issue with me even. It's like, I want all you guys to be accountable, but then am I actually holding myself accountable? So it has to start there first, because you have to set the standard and you have to be the benchmark for everybody else. But then if you're doing that pretty, very consistent, and you're now trying to get the rest of the staff to be accountable without micromanaging them, I do think there needs to be this aspect of if they make a mistake, is again addressing, all right, what caused a mistake? Is it something that I did in terms of how I taught you? Did I even teach you the SOP? Did we train? But then there is this other aspect though of, and I don't know if I want to say this word, but consequences or repercussions. At the end of the day too, it's if somebody's going to definitely okay. We all mess up. We're humans. I get that we're not robots, but it's just time and again, the biggest issues I find is there's no repercussions for somebody when they do screw up over and over and over again. Is there going to be any, say, write-ups, but some kind of disciplinary actions? Like at the end of the day, too, it's like we're running a business, and the business is involving patients, right? So if we're making mistakes, is that actually affecting patient care? One time, no big deal. Let me go back and actually make sure. I mean, I don't say no big deal. If it's like brain surgery, obviously it is, but is it something that I did at the beginning when I hired you in terms of how you're going to learn and how you're going to get taught? After that, though, and we reassessed and retrained you, now it's on the employee. So I'm going to definitely communicate to them. We are on the same page. We agree that you know what you're doing. You know you've been taught. Now this is what's going to happen if we have this mistake again. So there does need to be some kind of consequences. And again, a consequence could just be, I'm going to document this and then maybe retrain you again. Everybody has their own standard operating procedure, so to speak. Is it you make one mistake and you're out? I know a lot of offices say, all right, we'll give you 3 mistakes and then that's it. But I think we all do well with having some consequences and nicely having people call us out on how we're not delivering, especially if you're a provider, right? So it's not, they are at a higher standard than everybody else, but at the end of the day, if you're going to make mistakes repeatedly, especially if it's the same ones, like, is that really the kind of person that is helping elevate your clinic or not?
And I think it's really difficult, though, because I love what you talked about in one of your podcasts about, are we just accepting that there are different generations within our workplace and some people don't want to be leaders and some people do, and this younger generation isn't necessarily up to take on these leadership roles, and you have providers who want to come in and for 30 years they just want to literally clock in and clock out or stay as a provider and not take on any management or leadership responsibility. We have a massive demand and supply issue in healthcare, right? The demand is far higher than the supply. We're looking at who we're trying to hire and how can we identify the right people or even get people within our clinics who want to step up and be leaders, because we can't do it all by ourselves.
Yeah. So I think I look at this as 2 different kind of leaders for me. So, and I've had those providers too, where, I'm working with them for 10 years and they just want to come, I don't say just, that's silly, but they want to come in and treat patients and do nothing else. But when they're with the patients, they're 100% dedicated to getting the patient better. So I'm like, if you want to do that and just that alone, that's cool, because we need plenty of people like you. Because unfortunately, even in healthcare, we know that we don't all have a ton of providers that are really actually out there to help the patient. And I think that's something that just took me a while to wrap my head around. But so it's identifying that. And then, realistically, the other part of it too is to your question about how do we identify those people who maybe do want to grow. And I know you had spoken about this a few weeks back. I always go back to just who you're bringing in on your interviews. And then more importantly, what's being communicated in the interview, right? So it's knowing where I find a lot of companies struggle is they don't know what their values, their standards, what are the behaviors that they want to see day to day. They don't know what constitutes you being as a 10 out of 10 clinician or a 10 out of 10 employee. So I really feel like, number one, it's actually just important for an organization to be able to identify, all right, what are the behaviors that we want to see? And then what's the kind of person that's going to fill that? But then also being able to ask the right kind of questions for a provider of, I'm not a big fan, and I know this question has gotten asked less because I think it's one of the dumbest questions, but that's just my opinion. What's your 5-year, outlook? I just think at the end of the day, too, it really helps ask a potential employee, what does growth look like for you? What does success look like for you, right? It's just, you're going to be here for a year and want to be a direct, on the flip side, maybe they're here for 6 months and say, why didn't I get promoted yet to a director role? Or why didn't I get that
Dan, do you think that what somebody says in an interview to get the job isn't necessarily authentic and what they really want?
I do, because if you ask them, that's one thing, when we're going back to even leadership skills, I got better. That's one of mine that got insanely better was, what kind of questions am I asking in an interview? Because I used to be horrible at that. So I hired employees. They weren't horrible employees, but they definitely weren't a good fit. So if you're saying what skills should leaders develop, that's probably one of them, is how to actually improve your interview skills. But when you ask the right kind of questions, and what I mean by that is, I just ask questions that pertain to their personality. So what kind of initiative they taken. And I like to think about all the scenarios in the clinic that have gone wrong. And we all have them, right? Like the stuff where we forgot to do this or a provider dropped the ball on that. So we have all the perfect scenarios. I like to outline, really put people that I'm interviewing in those scenarios just to figure out, what would you do here? I can't have you necessarily treat a patient right now, but run me through the scenario. How would you handle it? Or what's, something that you've done without having to be told. So you can definitely get a good insight, because to your point, I can easily go on ChatGPT and just, if I'm interviewing with Meredith, all right, what kind of questions, might she ask me? So let me type that up and really practice that. Or if I'm maybe doing a Zoom interview, I could just have this freaking questions and answers right in front of my face. So I ask them stuff that I know they can't cheat on. I ask them things that are only related to their life experience, which ChatGPT definitely doesn't know. And that tells you everything to know about them, because they can't rehearse it. So taking that approach where I just really focused on, these are the behaviors I want to see. How have you exhibited it? What have you done in the past? My success rate of getting people that stayed for years skyrocketed. So it's very doable. Like, I'm trying to think of like the last person that I hired that was, I don't want to say a fake, but it's kind of like going on that first date. It's like, I got my dream match, and then the second or third day rolls around, like, who's this person, right? Like, I think we've all been there. And it happens with employees, I get it. But you'll see that less and less and less when you just start being able to actually go through some interview questions. And then honestly, the two other things that, from a standpoint of just identifying the right person, there's one of them small, but even on a job posting, I just got in the habit of even putting don't apply if you like all this, like don't apply if you like inter-office drama, don't apply if you don't take initiative. So I wanted to just set the standard for the kind of person that was going to come into the office for an interview. And then the other thing too is just being able to, if you have the ability to do this, is actually take them through some mock scenarios. Like I would actually have them, if they could, maybe do some manual therapy, but just going through a scenario. It's like, all right, let's do an actual evaluation. So I can see, all right, how will they communicate? How are they going to talk to me? How will they respond to questions that I'm going to ask them as a patient? So little things like that, it definitely helps identify, all right, is this person going to be most likely going to be really good for us?
What do you think of giving potential candidates personality tests, or at least candidates who are in higher level roles?
I like to do it for all of them. And I didn't used to do it. And I know everybody's got their personal preference as to which one they use. But I like doing it. And it's more so really for two things. Number one is it helps them understand more about themselves, which I really feel like most of us don't really actually know ourselves quite that much. But then the other thing from a standpoint of helping me is just knowing it's not necessarily their personality, it's how are they going to communicate. And you're really starting, it does help you understand what are some strengths and weaknesses. And, what I mean by that is if you have, you take a doctor who typically could be very analytical, and then you say to them, I want you to get on the phone and talk to patients, call patients. They're probably going to struggle with that. They tend to be a little more introverted, a lot of them. So am I putting people in positions where they're going to fail? Or am I using that information to say, you know what, I'm going to figure out how to work your personality into what we're doing to help you succeed as well as help the patient succeed. So I like doing them. It's just knowing what to actually do with the information, because I do feel that some companies, they get the info and say, here's your personality style, but then they don't do anything with it. They don't leverage it. Or again, I want you to do X, Y, and Z when their personality says they're terrible at it. Well, then what are you getting upset as the owner when you're actually just going against everything that they are?
One of my favorite questions to ask is, what kind of driver are you? Do you speed? Do you drive the speed limit? Do you mind driving at night? I feel like that. I drive a race car. I always wanted to be like the next Danica Patrick. It totally is my personality. And as I've gone through life and I've learned what type of driver people are, it helps me understand the type of personality they have, especially with making decisions, their risk tolerance, their ability to pivot and be okay with change. I love that question. What do you think of using that?
I like it. But to your point though, it's also important to know, all right, how do I interpret that, right? So for you, you're like, I know how I would interpret it. At the end of the day, though, it's just knowing, I know some people, they'll do, what's your favorite superhero? It's like, gives you some insight into the person. So, Meredith's like, I drive fast and I'm maybe a little aggressive.
And I want to be Wonder Woman.
Yeah. This person might have some leadership, some really high level leadership qualities, but they might have some communication challenges as well, right? So for me, I would have employees fill out the disc. And it was really more so about helping them understand, hey, I can see you moving into this role, but let's identify what are some challenges that you're going to have, right? You fit a profile that you don't like to have conflict, which if you're in a leadership position, I think we all know is kind of a prerequisite. Yeah, it's going to happen. And the ones that do well are going to be able to figure out, how do I handle this the right way?
Well, it's your natural, and I was going to say it's your natural behavior as well versus your adaptive behavior, specifically because you talked about the DISC assessment, which I love. And while there are certain things, yes, I love to drive fast and I am definitely a risk taker. I have to pull myself back on my adaptive skills because then my communication suffers. So I guess it probably is important to include some type of personality assessment.
You have to know, again, the more people can know about themselves, because again, too, you're somebody saying, why isn't Meredith promoting me to the clinic director? And then you're saying, I know this person. You don't hold anybody accountable. How can I, right? So that disconnect, though, that's why I'm like, it doesn't really serve me well to know more about you than you know about yourself. So that's where I'm like, let's understand each other here so we can figure out how do we also have to communicate to each other, but then understand too, our personalities, they give us a lot of advantages. Like for you, you're like, I'm a driver. Like I'm going to push. I got a dominant personality that's going to carry me forward, but there's going to be some instances where that's going to hurt me too. I might control the situations, control the conversations, maybe not take somebody else's emotions or thoughts into consideration. Like I know I'm probably describing myself back in the past too, obviously. So it's like you take the good, but then it's, all right, where's this actually hurting me as well? And then where do I need to your point, where do I need to adapt it a little bit and lean into, because we all have the abilities to lean into a different personality when we need it. Just as knowing when do I have to, I'm introverted by nature, when do I need to lean into being that extroverted person versus, all right, this is a situation that calls for me to take control and not throw it open to the team because we don't have time for this. So it definitely helps. And it just, again, it helps them understand your own thought process as well.
Because we're all struggling with staffing our clinics, our hospitals, do you think we're lowering our standards?
Some of us definitely are. Yeah, and you hear about that. I mean, I think it really depends on the space, right? Because again, if you're saying, well, I'm lowering my standards for hiring a surgeon, well, I know there's low standard. I mean, and I'm not knocking anybody who goes out of country, but those standards typically be a little bit less. But I just think it depends on the space. I know in the long-term care facility space, that's way more rampant. Whereas other industries, PT, chiro, I would say those industries are actually elevating. And I think that's actually contributing more to the lack of talent is that I think some people have raised the standards. So now you're saying, all right, we've raised our standards. So now we've disqualified a ton of people that we might have in the past. And then we also have a little bit of a shortage. So I think that's part of it actually is just the industry, like the specific niche within healthcare. And then I actually think it's the reverse for some people. It's just we're elevating. So it's making it harder to find people that fit that standard.
Why did you decide to start a podcast? Your podcast, by the way, is called All Things LOCS, and LOCS stands for Leadership, Operations, Culture, Strategy. What brought you into the podcast world?
I just love to talk now. Really, a few things. So from a standpoint of this works in conjunction with my consulting business. So for me and my partner, it's about being able to produce consistent social media marketing assets that also look good. Not wrong. I mean, I do plenty of, footage on my phone, but yeah, good footage. You got people you're talking to other people, and it's a good way to get your message out there very consistently. So that's one. And then really secondarily is that, I mean, if you treat a podcast like it should be treated per se, it's definitely, I mean, it's its own business. I know a lot of people get into it like, this would be great. Just sit down and record. Like, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it that I think some people don't recognize. So for us, it was definitely just, all right, let's use this as number one for our prime business. But then number two, if we can grow it, so it actually acts as a second revenue generator, that's a plus. So that's essentially why we started. But first and foremost, just marketing assets.
I've really enjoyed hosting Working Healthcare, and I'm coming up on my full second year of podcasting. And it is,
Yeah, hell yeah.
It is a business. It is so much a business. And people now think that that's all I do. And I'm like, actually, I run a really successful healthcare clinic in rheumatology, and we have 58 employees, and I am the CEO. And then I teach and I do all of these other things, but I do find it to be a really great bridge for all of the myriad of, I guess, responsibilities or things that I do. And then, yes, I'm an extrovert, so I get to meet people like you and chat all day.
Yeah. And you get to bring on different perspectives. I mean, it's a different way to add value to what you're already doing. Because I don't, most people are not going to have a business, like yourself, and then, all right, let's start a podcast about, I mean, they're out there, but you're not going to probably start a podcast on best home decor when you're running a
I don't know.
account.
My background, come on. I'm pretty good at design.
I mean, I can tell, but most likely you're going to say, all right, let's do something related to what I'm doing in the business. So, but it does give you the ability to, bring on other guests. And as you said before, even at the beginning of, hey, we got a ton of people coming in from LinkedIn. It also broadens your exposure. It's very easy within healthcare specifically to get, I mean, I think really any industry to just get pegged into, I'm an oncologist. I only hang out and talk to oncologists. I'm a physical therapist. I only speak to physical therapists versus, I'm on a podcast. I'm meeting, today's a PT, next week's a pharmacist. The week after that, it's an entrepreneur. So really broadens, I think it's really good for the person who's actually hosting, because it actually broadens their knowledge base as well. And it actually just makes them more valuable to the people they're trying to help on a day-to-day basis.
I love learning, and I do see myself as an educator. And you're right. Yeah. You nailed it. Like, I am constantly learning by being a part of Working Healthcare in this podcast. And part of your All Things LOCS has a lot to do with culture. And I love talking about this topic because whether you're a mom and pop medical practice, or you're a big hospital system, or you work in the government, or you work for an insurance company, culture is so imperative and important. And people think, we have an amazing culture. And then you hear from the outside and you're like, yeah, that's not really what word on the street is. So why is culture so important? And is it possible to change that culture if you keep your existing staff?
So number one, I mean, at the end of the day, and this is, I go back to when I was more, it's very easy to get focused on the outcomes, right? And the outcomes in healthcare, generally speaking, are I'm helping patients, right? Whatever kind of discipline you're in, pain or whatever it may be. It's like, that's my outcome. But then we can sometimes forget, all right, who's actually helping us get the outcome? And that was a struggle for me back in the day. I'm going to focus on amazing, amazing, amazing patient care. And then the employees, if I get to them, I'll get to them, which is, again, things you learn. But at the end of the day, the employees are the ones delivering and creating the outcomes, whatever industry you're in. So even though I didn't get that at the beginning, it makes sense that you would say, well, let me take care of the people that are actually taking care of the business. So when we talk about culture, and some people want to say, it's just, this foo-foo thing, or just it's been so rampant since COVID. Well, in reality, culture has obviously been around for decades. But when we look at the organizations that take care of the employees the best, and I'm not talking about just, you got your dumb Pizza Fridays, not dumb, but like Pizza Fridays and like those little things that it's nice, but it doesn't really do much on a day-to-day basis. Culture being, how do I actually help people grow and develop while still holding them accountable, treating them with kindness, but having standards here. When you do that consistently, your outcomes are just that much better. And I go back to when my employee retention stunk, culture wasn't any good. And that was a direct result of me. being a terrible leader. And when I started to shift that around, the culture improved. Not just that employees stayed, but patients actually stayed longer too. So you can see the correlation there.
How do you think you can accurately judge your culture? If you're in it, are there tests? Are there, I don't know, do you ask somebody on the street? Like, how do you actually judge it to see if it's something you need to work on? So
I know the previous response I would tell you would be, well, Meredith, you can fill out surveys and that. Those are silly because employers are never honest anyway. But really, there's a few things you could easily look at. Number one is just, outside of the behaviors, right? Behaviors of the employees. So are they showing up right when they should be clocking in versus who comes in early or prep for the day without actually having to be told to do it? What's the communication like? That's a big tell. And that's one of the things when I walk into an office, if it's quiet, that's not good. Because that means the staff aren't talking to each other. That's the biggest dead giveaway right there. And then the other two things I just look at is what's your employee turnover looking like? And I've mentioned that multiple times, but are people staying or quitting? And if they're staying, why are they staying, right? Is it just, well, they're comfortable, they've been here for so long, job market's scary, I get all that. But are they actually active in their own pursuit of being better? And then when we look at even things such as patient retention, that to me is a big indicator. Because if somebody is vested in actually wanting to be better and they're vested in actually helping the patients and then helping secondarily the organization, they're going to want to get their skills better to help patients stay in treatment. And something, it's different. Every industry is different. If you're a doctor, maybe an orthopedic, and you're like, I see the patients once a month, so retention, it's really not a big deal. But for some of us where we might be seeing them, week after week or multiple times a week, retention could be a big deal. It does speak to what is happening in the patient-provider interaction there. And the ones that are really, when you have a good culture, that's going to be represented in those interactions. So to your question now about how do you do that with a staff that, the current staff where the culture is not great, I think the biggest thing to really start with is, all right, who determined the culture? So if the leader, whether it's a director or an owner, never established a culture, the employees are going to do it for you. So therefore, you have to just start with the leadership, and then you have to start really having honest conversation with employees, and you have to really find out who's got buy-in, and how soon into this new initiative are we getting so to speak, an adoption rate? How many employees are actually buying into what we're doing and are willing to change? Because we know change is scary for pretty much everybody. But we also know things take time. So if I've been a terrible leader and now I want to say, let's overhaul the culture, we've never created one and now we're going to do it. I think where most of us fall into a trap is we expect it to happen real fast. When we know habits take time to build. I know the research is different, but it's going to take at least, 2 months for new habits to be formed. So that's what I look at as like, what are we doing consistently? If I'm overhauling the culture, what are we actually creating it into? Now, having said that, generally speaking, there's not going to be 100% buy-in. And you are going to have to get to a point where, this has happened with me, and I actually hate it, because you surround yourself with a good group of employees. Some of them that got you to where you're at now aren't going to be the same group that get you to the next level. And part of that next level is, all right, we're maybe changing or instituting a new culture, and this person doesn't want to do it because it requires more effort, or for whatever reason it may be. That person might not be there long term. And those, like I said, those are ones that stink because they're generally speaking good people. They haven't done anything wrong, but it's for real. One bad apple spoils the bunch. If you have that one person even who just doesn't want to change, and you can't expect everybody else to do it when they see somebody else not, because we're all going to go back to that person and say, well, if they can get away with it, why can't I?
And and to reflect upon that, I saw that happen in our own practice. When we started out, there were 5 of us. And now, as I said, we're 58. But there was one, and actually 4 of the 5 are still with us today. And it's been over 18 years. But the one person, we parted ways about 5 years in, because we had moved from one location to another. We were expanding, and she wasn't really wanting to jump on that train and still wanted that small mom and pop shop. And it was nothing against her and nothing against us, but it was just different, right?
Yeah. I've had that happen. It's the same thing. Employees just, hey, I see where you guys are going, the direction. I don't want to do that. Which I'm like, I appreciate the honesty. And then you have some people that are in denial about it, but it's just being able to help us figure out let's evaluate where we're currently at and where the clinic is moving. And again, when you approach these conversations through the lens of, I really just want the employees to be successful, because the more successful they are, obviously the trickle down effect is it helps the company. So if we understand, all right, what does success look like for you in the future? What does growth look like in your progress, so to speak? It does help them understand, all right, you know what, this actually isn't the situation I want to be in. I'm just letting my comfort kind of shackle me here. So yeah, to your point, you're going to have to unfortunately move on from some people, but you can do it in a good way. Maybe see if you could find them. I mean, for me, I would always try to find them another job. If I knew somebody in the industry, like, are you looking for this kind of person? Best I could to help them out. But at the end of the day too, if you're saying, hey, I want to elevate our own organization, then you have to understand what goes in, what needs to happen for that to actually occur.
There are so many core competencies within the leadership realm that I can think of, and I know that we've already spoken about today. What is one low-hanging piece of fruit that somebody who wants to better their practice or better their hospital setting can work on right now that's pretty easy?
So looking at that, I would say the easiest thing to do, and because this is something that I focus on, with myself, just in my life with clients, is no matter what's going wrong or what's going great, what can we do currently to actually improve what we're doing now, right? So it's very easy when we're hitting on all cylinders and it's amazing. All right, is there anything that could have made it better? And it doesn't take away from the wins. I know in the previous younger Dan would have always looked for what's wrong. And I do think that's where some people focus, like, all right, 99 things are great, but look at this one thing over here that's wrong. You guys are terrible. It's not that. It's just evaluating our performance, being honest about it, and then asking, all right, what could have made it better? So that's where I would actually start, because again, that takes a person who's, crushing it, getting all their outcomes, hitting their goals, patients happy, employees happy, and it says, how do I elevate that? It also forces the person who's not doing so great, or the organization that's maybe underperforming. It's not a matter of making them feel guilty about it or beating them up. It's actually helping them reflect and be accountable for what they're doing, to say, you know what, I'm doing all this other crap, not great. Let's start this and make this better. So that's where I would actually start.
What is the most difficult core competency to change?
In people or leaders?
I guess I'm going to talk about leadership, and I'm going to specify it to healthcare because you are on working healthcare.
Yeah.
And you and I are both leaders, and I have a very strong leadership audience for working healthcare. And, I'm sitting back here going, oh, you have such great ideas and certain things I have to look at, but I also have limited time. That's why I wanted to know about the low-hanging fruit. But what one is just really hard that you see as a leader within the healthcare environment to change?
I don't think it's anything I would say it's hard to change. I think where I look at is I think we make things too complicated. And what I mean by that is, often than not, I feel in healthcare in particular, I feel the mindset of people in leadership is sometimes the hardest to change, because there's so much crap going wrong, right? It's very easy. I mean, you're on LinkedIn, like you said. You go on and next time you're on, you look at how many posts are actually, here's solutions for the problems, versus how many posts are just, here's everything that's wrong with healthcare. Insurance sucks, or this is, it's like, all right, we understand all that. But are we focusing on, especially if you're running an organization, are we focusing on what we can actually improve, right? Because meanwhile, while I'm kind of bitching and moaning about how bad United Healthcare is, I'm not focusing on my employee development and my leadership training. So we just get sometimes wrapped up in the stuff that we have no ability to really change. And I know it sounds, somebody saying, oh, you're pessimistic. Like, well, in reality, if I'm leaving stuff up to government, then why would I anticipate them changing stuff when clearly they haven't done a great job to begin with? So I'm going to say, well, what can I do within the four walls of my organization that I can improve upon? Hey, you know what? We get a lot of denials, but how many of those are actually due because we screwed up on maybe the front end? We didn't get all of the patient information, or the providers are documenting wrong, or my coders are not putting the codes correctly together. Like, we have the ability to do that. So I think when we even low-hanging fruits, like, what can we change? Like, the mentality that we have, focusing on everything that's wrong versus focusing on what can I actually improve, and just put some effort to that.
And this is the perfect segue to my final question, because
I
know this was awesome, Dan, because I always ask the same question, but this is perfect because I don't want to sit here and bitch and moan and say how horrible our American healthcare system is, because we know that, right? We know we're struggling, but I want to create change. So that's why I interview leaders like you to shed light on what we can do to create change. So if you could create one change within our American healthcare system, because I am giving you my magic wand for a short bit, what change would that be?
Ooh, so I think out of the numerous options that we have, I think there's really probably two things, but number one would just be the pay structure. I think that's the biggest one, is that when you look at the rationale for a lot of people to even not go into healthcare, maybe to open up their own practice, or for people to stay in it long term, is generally speaking, well, I'm making less money every single year. So how the hell am I going to actually survive this? Especially if you're in your 30s or 40s, and you're looking at the next 20 years potentially. It's like, how am I surviving in an industry that's kind of actually going down with regards to what we're getting paid? So it would definitely be the pay structure. Medicare is a joke, obviously. We know doctors and everybody's making I think we're making less than we were 30 years ago. So, I mean, give me a break there. So that needs to be overhauled. And then just I'm going to add the second part to this would be the ability of private equity and insurance companies to own medical organizations. I think is just criminal, because, and then on the flip side, it's, well, a doctor can't own a hospital, but a private equity can, or, it's so that kind of stuff where you're taking all the autonomy out of healthcare and you're making it very corporate. And then, obviously patients are looking at it that way too, saying, doctors are greedy as hell. It's like, no, we're all in the same situation here. So that's what I look at. And I know the challenge here is that, again, we don't have a lot of control over that. So I see where some people look at healthcare as being pessimistic. It's like, that's exactly what I would change. How much are they getting, every provider, not just doctors, every single medical provider, how much do they get paid? And then take out BS ownership of private equity and insurance companies. I mean, I think United Healthcare owns like 2.5% of clinics in the US. So it's like, what kind of decisions are getting made when you have that, behind scenes?
Dan Neissany, thank you for joining me on Working Healthcare.
Meredith, thank you very much for having me. This was a blast.
If this conversation hit home or made you think a little differently, don't keep it to yourself. Share the episode, tag a friend, or post about it on social media. Connect with me on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going in between episodes. If you've got a question, an episode idea, or someone you think I should feature, send me a note at meredithhirsh.com. Thank you all for the 5-star reviews. They help more listeners find the show. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Tune in weekly as we explore the inner workings of healthcare, because you can't fix what you don't understand.